Please be aware this is my personal opinion, and to expect full spoilers for the topic ahead. Over the Garden Wall, a short but highly recommended 10-episode animated series surrounding the story of two boys and their adventures in the unknown. I watched this series once before, about 7 or 8 years ago, and all I really remembered about it was not quite thinking it's the underappreciated masterpiece a lot of people make it out to be. I've wanted to reevaluate it for some time with a fresh perspective, and now, rewatching it again today, my stance is largely the same. But that's not to say I think this is a bad series. The atmosphere is by far its strongest trait. This is like the distilled essence of autumn, Halloween, and spooky woods, with a dash of old-fashioned nostalgia for good measure. It's no wonder Over the Garden Wall is considered a classic for the fall season. It's absolutely dripping in vibes. The creepy elements are balanced well too. Not every episode's trying to scare you. There's a larger variety of moods than you might expect, especially with all of the humor woven throughout.
And the cat's back. Hide!
This series has a fair amount of funny lines, and they're almost all coming from the younger of the two protagonists, Greg.
I found a duck. Do you know how to make eggs from a duck?
By far the standout character. He's lovably positive, thoughtful, and confident, making it easy to root for him and find charm in his antics. His design's simple, and he has a well-conveyed personality. I'd actually say most of this cast is pretty well written. Each character has a clear identity, and their different outlooks play off each other well, for a compelling dynamic. Wirt, the older brother and mainest of the main characters, fills the role well. He's far from perfect, but easy to relate to, and thankfully grows throughout the journey, becoming more courageous and learning to appreciate his brother and take responsibility. Beatrice the Bluebird's another pivotal character along for the ride with her own problems to figure out. While her attitude can sometimes be grating, it's that same demeanor that causes her to clash with Wirt, making for far more interesting interactions between the two than if she was more carefree. There's also a woodsman who shows up from time to time with his own dilemma, and of course the frog who makes a surprisingly lasting impression. Although I wasn't very moved by the emotional moments, they each work well enough. Unfortunately, the wrap-up leaves something to be desired, and that's kind of my biggest problem with this series. The Beast is a letdown. I like a lot about him as a concept. He's set up from the very first episode, explained as a repulsive entity to be avoided at all costs. There's a slow build-up to the confrontation with him, with more getting revealed as the story goes on. On top of this, his design's great. A pair of glowing eyes on a pitch black body with antlers. It's only briefly shown what he really even looks like, which was a good choice to keep that sense of mystery and fear intact. So what's my problem exactly? There's just not enough of a payoff to the Beast for how much he's built up early on. It turns out he's actually not very threatening, really only manipulating others into bad situations, and he's not even very clever about it. I guess the Beast is meant more as a manifestation of fear, but for all the time spent setting him up, he just doesn't amount to much. Though I will give credit to the trees growing out of people concept. That's pretty gnarly. Over the Garden Wall's mostly a series of vignettes showing the strange people and places the unknown has to offer. Episode 7, The Ringing of the Bell, is by far my favorite episode. It's a simple premise and probably the creepiest the show gets, with a fun twist and pleasantly dark imagery. The series doesn't always make the best use of its time, however, choosing to focus on shenanigans that don't contribute much to the overall narrative. It can be a mixed bag. Certain stories will resonate more with certain people, but sometimes it feels like running in circles without making a point. Episode 8, Babes in the Wood, is my least favorite. This one has Greg playing around in a dreamlike world, and while it ultimately ends with him making a heartfelt sacrifice for the sake of his brother, it's mostly aimless mischief. I also didn't care for the flashback episode that follows, showing what happened to the boys before the story began. It doesn't tell us anything essential we didn't already know, and I think this episode could have been been spent on something more meaningful. This series has quite a few songs, and they're thankfully never grating, and in a few cases, even pleasant. I'm looking at you, potatoes and molasses. The animation's also quite nice. Nothing crazy, but attractive. It's aged very well. Sound design and voice acting's also really well done. You might be surprised how positive my impressions of this series are, since I don't quite agree with the reverence it gets. But like I said, this isn't a bad series. Between its cozy autumn themes, spirited characters, and occasionally funny lines.
Curse you, lady! Curse you! You'll die someday, and I'll laugh! Laugh!
It's perfectly watchable. It just fails to meet its full potential. The story seemed like it was building to something bigger than it ended up being, so I ultimately left feeling unfulfilled, and I'm disappointed this is all the series amounted to. Perhaps I'm searching too hard for a more ambitious story when it's clearly happy to be a low-investment adventure with quirky fun and warm moments. If you haven't seen Over the Garden Wall, give it a shot. You'll probably like something about it, but if you don't, you're not really missing too much. If you're looking for a cartoon that captures the spirit of the fall season with great humor and creepy imagery, then absolutely check out Gravity Falls. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, consider checking out the description for ways you can help support my channel. And feel free to let me know in the comments any movies or shows you'd be interested to hear my thoughts on. As always, be well everyone, and I'll see you next time.